This episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show is brought to you by American Helix. The American Helix is a revolutionary new concept in smoking technology. Based on Bernoulli's principle, the shape of the pipe creates a venturi effect, causing a swirling motion of the smoke through precision microholes that are produced for the intake system. This results in a slower burn that conserves tobacco and gives a smooth, refreshing smoke, making the Helix the smoothest hitting pipe on the market. For further info or to locate their products, you can find them on Facebook at facebook.com/SSHelix or contact them. signaturehelix@gmail.com. That's signaturehelix@gmail.com. This episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show is brought to you by Mountain Glass Arts. For the month of June 2016, Mountain Glass is offering 3 sales. Their first sale is their Boros sale number 1, North Star First Quality Rods at 30% off. Boros sale number 2 is AccuGrind Joints at 30% off, and to receive discounts on either one of these 2 sales, all you have to do is put in the code NORTHGRIND at checkout. That's NORTHGRIND at checkout. And for all you soft glass nerds out there, soft glass sale creation is Messy Rod, 30% off. All you have to do is put in the code MESSY, MESSY at checkout. For any more questions, comments, or concerns, just go to mountainglass.com. That's mountainglass.com. This is the Wise Guy Radio Show, a podcast dedicated to educating and inspiring through conversations with today's top talents in the world of glass. We will be dissecting their journeys in hopes to deliver actionable content that you, the artist, can start implementing now, helping you grow not only as a creative spirit, but also a successful artistic entrepreneur. With a little organization, relationship building, and your artistic ability, you can obtain greatness. Climb aboard, whether an artist, retail owner, or enthusiast. We have a ton of fun in store for you. Welcome to the Wise Guy Radio Show. You're listening to the Wise Guy Radio Show. Hey, what's happening? Welcome to the Wise Guy Radio Show, episode number 114. This is Jay Michael, your host. Thank you so much for tuning in today. With 17 years of experience behind the torch, I am as excited as always to bring you conversations with artists, sharing their stories in hopes to inspire and entertain while helping you grow your business. And today is no exception. And today is going to be an awesome episode featuring Lewis Wilson, who, in my opinion, is one of the godfathers of flame working. There's a lot of guys out there. There's a handful of them that have been very instrumental into the educational side of flame working, and Lewis Wilson is definitely one of them. Through 40-something years of experience, this man has had a hell of a life, and we talk about a lot of it in the story. His bio will be in the show notes. You guys check that out, and his background is pretty phenomenal. And through this conversation, I learned a lot about my local history and glass blowing and lamp working in general, which I had no idea about, which is kind of crazy, and I'm glad I found it. And I just definitely am excited to have him on. He's being more involved now with some of you younger guys and gals in the newer generations of flame working and pipe making and everything else. And if you have an opportunity to take a class with him, I would recommend it. In the show notes, you'll see that there are several classes coming up in August, September, October that he's teaching around the country. So if you have not had a class ever and have a little bit of extra cash you'd like to spend, and it was not only spending, but you're investing in yourself, I definitely recommend getting into one of his classes. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode. And coming up here, also, we're going to be, the next episode after this, with 115, we're going to be continuing our series on selling your work. We just had part 2. This will be part 3 coming up, which we'll be getting into more, discussing the idea of basically mass production, mass low-end production, per se, versus low-volume, high-end production, and how to go about pricing that and really filling yourself out. And I hope you guys are enjoying this series. And when it's all said and done, there will be all the information for these series are on the website, which you can go to wiseguymedia.com and just go to the resource page and click on that, and you'll see all the PDFs that we have in the show notes and stuff. And yeah, I just got off the phone with Lewis and just had a mind-blowing, amazing conversation. So I hope you guys enjoy that. And before I ramble on too long, I'm going to get out of here. I got a lot of shit to do this week, get my glass done. We are officially decided to shut down the studio as our focuses and stuff have changed directions, per se. Last year for myself, just kind of give you guys some insights, I started a lot of projects, including scaling my business. This podcast started, And then also I went seasonal at Disney to really focus on these two major areas that I wanted to get going. And then just through trials and tribulations with the studio and trying to figure things out and get my groove going, as well as the podcast and still trying to cover some shifts going on at Disney, I got a bit overwhelmed and just things weren't going with, as they should. And throughout life, if you pay attention to how life works, when things become, we always like to push through barriers and get, have adversity and all that kind of stuff. But when things just don't where they continuously don't work for you, it's usually a sign that you shouldn't be doing that specific thing, or maybe pivot and take another direction. And so we did that with the studio. We went from 1,200 square feet. We downsized to 600 square feet. And then now through this process, we are now going to be closing our doors, and Chad and myself are going to be parting our ways. We're him and I are still great friends. Nothing negative about this whole situation, just a convenience factor, as well as my main focus is going to be going away from my personal glass work at home to really more on the educational side of the show, and some new stuff I'm going to be dropping here in the next 6 months for you guys online, some new online courses I'm creating, and as well as my involvement online with the Torch Talk and the Wise Guy Radio Facebook page. I have a private Facebook group, the Wise Guy Radio Facebook group, that's for advanced glass artists that I haven't been really promoting much, but that's going to be coming up here pretty soon too. We're going to have some more advanced tech videos and conversations, and it's really for those artists out there that have like the 5 years plus under your belt. And even though if you've been on the torch for 3 to 4 years and you feel advanced, we're still kind of trying to keep it to a 5-year and up kind of group. There's a lot of groups out there for 10 years and up and that kind of stuff, but this is going to be more of a technical talk instead of the kind of introductory type of stuff. But I still am going to be involved with the Torch Talk group and sharing knowledge, but really also going to be focusing on to my own project here for you all listening here, which I'm excited about, and going to be teasing it here and there as we go along. And one day here, hopefully I'm looking for October is when we're going to be launching it. But also have a lot of guests coming up here for the show, a lot of interviews in the banks. Lewis Wilson was one that I just literally got off the phone with him. And because I've been wanting to get him on the show since day one, I want to go ahead and push his show up to, which will come out on, I guess, Monday coming up. So you'll be listening to this. Yeah, well, today's Monday on the show. It's actually Thursday for me. So behind the curtain stuff. But anyways, I'm rambling. Mind's blown here again, talking to Lewis. Had a lot of fun. So hope you guys enjoy. Definitely go to wiseguymedia.com, subscribe to our newsletter email, check out all of our fun stuff on there, show notes. We're constantly putting up all the previous and past episodes. The way iTunes works is they're only allowed to host 100 episodes on their platform of iTunes. So now that there's 114 episodes, the first 14 episodes are no longer available. So they are all going to be available on the website. So definitely check those out. And I've also posted some of the interviews as best ofs as well through the process. But that being said, love you guys. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. For everybody that was checking out my Facebook Live video I did the other day, it was a lot of fun. And the response was awesome. And again, I appreciate you all for tuning in. And those that have viewed it since, it was a lot of fun. And the Facebook Live, I think it's a great thing. A lot of social media platforms and everything else out there for live streaming, and the Facebook Live one seems to be one that works the best because we're all on Facebook. So look for more of those videos coming out, and if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to contact me at info@wiseguyradio.com, and you can also comment in the show notes here on the link. If you just have a smartphone you're listening to, if you touch the logo for the podcast, if you have iTunes, the logo will flip around and all the show notes pop up, and there's links on there for you to leave a comment. Or you can just go to wiseguymedia.com and listen to the show there. And at the bottom of that, there's also a comment link for you as well. So love you guys. Please make sure you go on to iTunes, subscribe to the show if you have not, stay up to date, leave me a comment and a review. And other than that, enjoy the show with Lewis Wilson. And we'll talk to you guys in the next episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show. Take it easy. And as always, I love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care. Peace. Hey, Lewis, how's it going, brother?
It's going fine.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's, like I was saying, pre-show here is honored having you on. I've generationally wise, I've been doing this now 17 years, and some of the first being a self-taught artist, some of the first ever things I learned was through your videos, going and checking them out from the library. And it's kind of funny now seeing the new generation with technology now learning from YouTube, well, quote-unquote learning. And so it's fun to see the different, my generation versus the new generation, and technology versus, where they are now, going from VHS to the internet. I mean, who knew that, that was going to be the deal? But before I get all sidetracked here, if you want to kind of give us some intro into your basic beginnings and where you got started, and then we'll just go from there.
In 1972, I was in my third year of being a medic or a corpsman in the Air Force, and it was during the Vietnam War, and I worked in an emergency room in Cocoa Beach, Florida at Patrick Air Force Base. And I worked every third day, either 17 or 24 hours, and I worked pretty much the entire night shift. On a weekend, it was a 24-hour shift. And I had always been interested in glass, and so I found a book in the Air Force Base library called Scientific Glassblowing, and I think it was written by Strong and Hamsavar, these two scientific glass blowers. And it was written in the 40s, and it was on crossfires, and everything in it was backwards and not usable. But I was able to learn enough from it that I taught myself how to do some woven glass by going into the medical lab at the hospital at night and getting a Bunsen burner and using 4-millimeter stirring rods, Pyrex stirring rods. And I just had sunglasses. I didn't have any didymium lenses or anything like that. But I taught myself enough just to have fun and to play around with the glass. And I did it on a Burns-O-Matic weed burner torch. And this is a little handheld thing, kind of not really MAP gas, but propane. And it just had a little teeny nozzle on it, and you lit it with a match, and that was your torch. And it would run for about an hour. It had probably 110 decibels. It was really loud. And, you had fire, you had glass, and you were making things. And I was doing that just for fun. And at that same time, because I had all this time on my hands from only working every third day, I had a small apartment on the beach in the Atlantic, Florida, which is maybe 10 miles south of Cocoa Beach. And it was like $135 a month for this little studio apartment. It was 50 yards from the water.
Wow. And
a really good deal that I had all this time off. And at the same time, I had a Quaker parrot. And I had it for a while in the barracks, and then they had all this stuff where there's too many fucking animals in the barracks. There's a guy that had a raccoon and piranha and all this weird stuff.
Crazy.
So we were kind of like a MASH unit, just in the way of, if you're in the military, that's fine. If you're a medic in the military, all the rules are kind of out the window. And but I had played around a lot with glass, but also with candles and silver soldered rings, stuff along that line. And my first actual store was before I moved to Atlantic. And when the base commander had made this new directives, it said, okay, all the pets are gone. This isn't a zoo. Everybody. So I had to find a place for my bird. I had a Quaker parrot named Sydney. And so I rented a store that cost me $50 a month in Cocoa Beach. And if you know anything about Cocoa Beach, there's one of the old things was a missile lounge where all the airmen would go and get drunk and watch strip shows and stuff. Across the street, and this is right on A1A, across the street from the missile lounge was this little teeny court complex, or a little courtyard with small stores in it. And I rented this thing and then put up the amazing Sydney Bird candle shop. And I sold sandcast candles and story rings and glass. And I did that on my 2 days off. And the whole thing was, it cost me $50 a month to have a place where I could keep my bird. And so that was the story of how the first store I ever had was this candle and thing. And I might have made, $5 a day, but if I'd go in, people would leave me little notes. What the hell is this store? And you're never here and you're never open. Blah blah blah. And I'd leave notes the next day that said, "It's you see my bird in there? It's my bird's house," and all that sort of stuff. So. But I had taught myself enough so that when I came into my last 3 months of active duty, that I had found a transition program where you could approach the military and say, hey, there's this guy who will teach me a skill if I transition out for 3 months early. So I had learned enough glass to convince the Arribas Brothers that they could have me for free. So for 3 months, I went back and forth from Cocoa Beach to Orlando and studied with Miguel Bonilla. And then I met Rob Parkin there, who's the glassblower at Dollywood now. And then Steve Gruba had been there earlier and was gone through. And then also Jim Thingwall, who did Glassline Magazine, had gone through there. And when I worked at the park, on my left side was Jan Moriarty, and she did all the Tinkerbells. That's the only thing she made. And they were really big on everything you made had to be exact size and the proportions and all this. I mean, it was quite restrictive on what they wanted you to make. I only made 3 things: crabs, teapots, and bird baths, 1,000 in a row each thing.
Interesting.
So that's how I started with glass, with the military connection, and then I learned enough glass there in that 3 months that I knew that, hey, I think I'm going to continue with this. And so the day I got out of the military, I went over to Busch Gardens. I went from Cocoa Beach to Tampa, and went there to their corporate offices. And I had a few pieces that I'd been making, and I was like rank beginner. I sucked bad. And so I went in there. I'm a little kid of, I had just turned 25. I'd worked glass for, maybe self-taught for about a year and a half, but maybe seriously for 3 months, 4 months. And, I said, well, here's what I do. I'd like to work glass in your park. And they said, well, let's see, you have no insurance. You only know a handful of items. You're pretty bad. You don't have a display, all this sort of stuff. And then the phone rings in the next cubicle, and I'm hearing this guy say, oh, damn, the fire eater quit. We need a juggler. And I just looked at the guy I was talking with and says, can I go talk to that guy? I'm a fire eater and a juggler. And he kind of opened his eyes and what? And so I said, well, thank you for your time. And I left the one cubicle, and I docked to the guy that I'd overheard him answer the phone. And I said, hey, I was talking with the dude next door here, but I eat fire and I juggle, and I also throw knives. I've been raised in a military family, and when I was 11 years old in Goose Bay, Canada, which is, like 1,000 miles north of New York City. It's way north. You get snowed in, and I was, 10, 11 years old, and I taught myself how to do circus tricks, how to eat fire and juggle and throw knives and all these things, just as a young kid to keep myself entertained. Mm-hmm. So I approached Busch Gardens there, that day that I wanted to be a glass blower, and they said, hey, we'll hire you. And so this was 1974, and they hired me at $15 an hour.
Wow.
In 1974, and I worked with 6 tattooed belly dancers. I mean, really skanky girls, and a musician, a magician, and his girl helper, and an organ grinder with a monkey, and all these weird little group. I had to join the Florida Actors Guild to be working at the park. That's one of the rules, where you had to be almost like SAG membership or
right.
Screen Actors Guild type stuff. But I had to do all that sort of stuff, and I worked there for 2 years. So I would work with all these entertainment things. It was in Busch Gardens at the Moroccan Village, and they had this little pond that I would walk out on stones that were under the water. So looking at me from a distance, it looked like I was walking on water into this little kiosk in the middle of this pond, and I would do this little half-hour or a 15-minute show twice an hour. So I didn't even work a full hour to get my $15 an hour. I would basically be, playing around with a bunch of tattooed girls and stuff, and it was quite comical. But and I did that for 2 years, and then worked glass at night, and then I started doing shows from there.
Man, that's fascinating. Yeah, it's amazing too, just the timing wise. God Almighty, especially when you're saying as a kid you're teaching yourself this stuff because you're bored. And then one day it leads into that. It's pretty amazing. Life's so fucking funny sometimes, where it just takes turns, and you just never know things you learn as a kid where it's going to take you as an adult. It's so fascinating. And I remember myself, like one of my first introductions as a child to glass lampworking was at Busch Gardens myself. And I remember on our way out one day, I was like probably 10 years old, just thinking about this now and go by the ticket counter, and they had a little shop there, and a guy in the window was making a giraffe or something like that. And it was just like, I remember sitting there just like, holy shit, this is incredible. And I've always been fascinated by fire as a little pyro kid, burning my backyard down and everything else. So I never imagined glass would be my craft or my job or as a career-wise, but I just remember being so fascinated by it. And once I started doing it myself, it was like, this is it. And I did the Renaissance Festival myself, so I understand being around the interesting folks on the circuit in a sense. Definitely a lot of characters out there, so,
Yes.
It's so fascinating. So when you were doing your glass at night, were you doing it at your house?
Yeah, I actually was working at Busch Gardens, and then I worked in I lived in St. Petersburg, and it was at this would be, say, 1974 and 5, and then I had gotten married, and then my daughter was born, and I was doing some festivals and stuff. And then after the 2 years, what I started making, I had a line of necklaces and earrings. And this is back when you didn't have colored glass. You had clear, and then you had these stains and stuff. But I had 35 different earring and necklace designs, and I would sell them as a set where it was an earring and necklace in this long little display thing, and for like $4.50 wholesale. And I would leave and go pretty much run the entire state, maybe every 3 weeks. I would leave St. Pete. I would drive down to Sarasota and Fort Myers, and then cut across to Fort Lauderdale, and then work my way up all the way to Orlando, and then cut across and come back down. And then also Six Flags or SeaWorld and Cypress Gardens and Circus World and all those things through there. I had a loop that I did every 3 weeks and was just doing wholesale.
Nice. Yeah, Circus World, man. And here in Cypress Gardens, a lot of folks that aren't from the area don't know that, but it's Circus World was a place I went to as a kid all the damn time. It was the closest thing to Disney, and my parents could afford to take me to. It's interesting.
And then that's where I first met Shane Farrow. He was working at Cypress Gardens. He was doing hollow swans had one of those big rigs where there's like maybe an 8-foot trough with all these cut-off flames, maybe 16 flames in this 8-foot length, and you'd heat up an 8-foot section of soft glass tubing, and then this whole thing mechanically would pull the points on it automatically for you.
Wow.
And then you'd end up with these and these were lead crystal swans, and they were the barometer things, or the ones with the rain and all that sort of stuff. But that's when I met Shane Farrow. He was doing that in production there. And then also it was when I was still doing shows in the Florida area that I ran into Robert Nicholson in 1977 at the Pinellas County Flea Market. We were both set up there, just selling stuff at the flea market because, in the 70s, there's usually good crowds, and it was, $5 or $10, to set up. And the day that I met him, we were both selling at the Wagon Wheel Flea Market. And we kind of looked at each other and talked and started talking technique. And almost at the same time, I says, "Oh my God, you're sharing information." We said it out identically, and because there was a guy that nobody would ever know that had been a glassblower at St. Pete out on the pier named Bill Triggs.
Oh yeah, I know Bill.
And do you know him?
Yeah.
Or did you know of him?
Yeah, I knew him. Yeah.
Okay, well, very few people know of him because he's self-destructed. And the story goes, I finished at Disneyland. I finished by learning at Disney with the Arribas Brothers and Miguel, and then I started working over there at Busch Gardens. And then I ran into Bill Triggs, and he had set up in the evenings at the Kapok Tree, this restaurant. He had a little kiosk, and he would make necklaces and pendants, and they weren't a deal. They're just little things for $4 at all. But I had finished up at Disney, and I was working at Busch Gardens, and I ran into Bill Triggs at the pier in St. Petersburg. And I walked in all happy and smiley and said, "Oh, hi, how you doing? My name's Lewis Wilson. I'm a glassblower too." And when I said, "I'm a glassblower too," he put a towel over his torch, like I'd never seen a National 3A blowpipe. Told me to get out of his fucking shop and don't you steal my designs and all this sort of stuff. And I had always been the opposite of that, because when I met Mickelson, you know, it was all about, hey, I'll show you this, I'll show you this, and blah, blah, blah. When I met Mickelson, he was doing great sculptures and still putting them on a woven base, you know, running stitch with a loop stitch trim.
Huh.
And he had been interviewed at Glassline maybe in the mid-1980s, and he said he remembered that I had said that his work looked like pond scum. And I said, yeah, right, I would have called you pond scum in 1977. But we both lived in St. Pete there for a couple of years, and then I moved up and lived in the Boston area in Quincy from 1979 to 1978 to 1981, and did maybe 35 or 40 shows a year located out of the Boston area.
Interesting.
So,
yeah, man, that's fascinating. Just because I've lived in St. Pete my entire life, I've been here almost 40 years, and so it's now that I'm talking with you and getting some history, it's fascinating that there's this glass history here in St. Pete that I had no idea about. So this is pretty damn cool.
Yep.
Yeah, and the flea market's still there too. It's still rocking and rolling.
Oh yeah.
It's crazy. Huh. Fascinating, man. My mind just kind of went sideways there. Just it's so neat because, like, you know, we had the Renaissance Festival here, and some of the guys which is where I started my apprenticeship, a gentleman named Gordon Key, and he was a flame worker, just did all clear stuff, dragons and fairies, and, you know, your typical Renaissance type stuff. And they had their house base was here and was over in Gulfport at the time. And but he did the same kind of thing. He would make a bunch of crap, and whatever he could sell, he'd just do the Florida tour and try to hit all the shops he could. That same loop you're talking about, you know. Excuse me. And yeah, man, it's just neat seeing the roots, especially with you and Mickelson both here. And like you're saying, you know, it's interesting too seeing the different types of artists. Some artists are like, it's ancient Chinese secrets, I'm not telling you shit, or like you and myself and Robert, who are all about educating and sharing, because we can't grow if we can't share our knowledge. You know, it's no matter how self-taught you are, if you see somebody doing something different, you're going to learn something and be able to carry that on.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing. So, I'm trying to see. So, at what point in time did you start doing the Crystal Myth videos?
1993, I did the first in the bead making. And I had been asking Charlie Miner, who's a furnace worker in Tesuque, New Mexico. I've been bothering him for probably 3 or 4 years, from the late 1980s into the early 90s. He said, you know, I'd really like to go out and learn some furnace work from you, this and that. And, you know, I was making, and by 1993, 92, when I'm having these conversations with Charlie, I had already made a piece in 1987 that was given to the King of Spain, in 1989 to George Bush Sr., and a guitar for Bo Diddley, and then in 92 I made a piece for Bill Clinton from our state as the gift of state, or his inaugural gift. So I was doing these Indian dancers that were fairly large, you know, out of 1-inch rod, and good quality stuff. So I was pestering Charlie Miner to learn some furnace work, and he said, "Oh, you know, go away, kid, you bother me." You know, he's a furnace worker, and still back then, lamp workers were spit on by, you know, the furnace workers and the Glass Art Society and all that. And so, out of the blue, I get this call maybe a week before Christmas from Charlie Miner, and he says, "Hey, got a question here. Do you make beads? I've got 2 friends of mine from high school that really want to learn how to make beads, and I don't know where to send them or anything like this." And so this call came in December of 1992, a week or so before Christmas, and I said, "Sure, I know how to make beads. You know, how can I help you?" He said, "Well, if you can teach my 2 friends here how to make beads, I'll spend a day with you, and I could let you come into the furnace, and I'll show you how to make paperweights and blow some stuff up here." So I said, "Oh, wow, that's really cool." So I hung up the phone, and then I started researching a little bit, because I knew somebody in town that had some soft glass, and I knew that, and I was still at that point still working on a national 3A blowpipe, and so I on my national, I taught myself how to work soft glass beads that night. And then the next morning, these two guys showed up, and I gave them a day of teaching them. And it was mostly that it was a different type of glass and different rules. And because I was using a pre-mixed torch on a national, soft glass hates pre-mix. It was a surface mix. So I learned enough that night to teach them the next day, because at that point I'd been working glass for over 20 years. So I had a clue what I was doing, but I was kind of lame on bead making. But in their eyes, they didn't have a clue that I learned the night before, so I just kind of faked my way through it, and they were happy as hell. And then I went up and hung out with Charlie and this and that. And in the meantime, I had gotten a binder bench burner and realized that, oh my God, it makes the soft glass beads work really well. I'd learned a little bit more and researched them, and I'd found a bunch of back issues of Lapidary Journal and Ornament Magazine. There were the magazines that really had a lot to do with lampworking back then. You had to find a stone magazine for doing gems and minerals, Lapidary Journal, and it had some tutorials. And actually, probably by 1994, 95, I was writing tutorials for Lapidary Journal. So I'd learned enough stuff here to play around that I probably showed another 15 or 20 people in Albuquerque from the middle of December until the first 2 weeks of January. So I start to do my taxes in 1993, getting them ready because I had corporate stuff, so they were due before April 15th. And I realized that I didn't have money to pay some stuff for blah, blah, blah. And so I said, well, hell, I think I'll see about if I can do a video as a way of making some money to pay my taxes. So I went to my bank and told them, I've been with you guys for 15 years and this and that, blah, blah, blah. And I want to do a little video for like $3,000, that would have covered this money that I needed to pay. And they kind of looked at me and this and that. They liked my proposal, and they said, well, if you use this video production company and this video duplicating service and this advertising company, will give you $18,000. We don't want to give you $3,000 because you won't succeed. You'll need to make sure you do it well. So the bank gave me this loan for $18,000, and I did my first bead making video 3 weeks later. And then before I even had the sleeves for the inserts on the video, I went out and did quartzite, which is almost to Arizona on the California-Arizona borderline on Interstate 10. And it's where a lot of gems and minerals and glass shows up. So I did that in 1993 in January. And I sold a bunch of these videos, and the people that bought them, I had to mail them the insert sleeve because they hadn't been printed yet. So that was my first thing on doing with the video. And then I was promoting that video in Ornament Magazine and Lapidary Journal, and then also in Glassline. And it was just an incredible success immediately. $43, and I had an 800 number, and the phone would ring, and every time the phone would ring, it was $43. Boom, 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 boom. And sometimes I'd sell 15 or 20 videos a day. And this was way back in the beginning in 93.
Nice. And
then I immediately turned around, and the next year I did advanced beads, and I had Kevin O'Grady in it, and Keith Kreider, and Jerry Coleman, and then it was advanced beads, buttons, marbles, stuff like that. And then I also did the Marini making and beads in the shapes of animals. And then it went on to optical paperweights with shot ophthalmic encapsulating crystal, and then paperweights with the Jedkid electric furnace, and then borosilicate ones. And then in 95, I did the 5-tape series on sculpting that was my most popular. You could teach bead making to anybody, but most people, they were really waiting for that 10 hours lampworking take on doing sculptures. So from 93 up until maybe 2005, I did over 20 titles. And then I also did maybe 15 other videos for a variety of other people. I did the instructional video on how to use the glass technology torches because they were so complex in the beginning. Nobody knew how to use that third knob.
Yeah.
And so I did the video. Willie Horn came out here and Tim Dreyer and a few other people, and we did a video that I produced at my studio here.
Fascinating.
And then all that bead thing came around. I started teaching. I've had over 1,200 students that I've taught, and this is with me at the same table. This is the video students. This is real people.
Right.
And I did it when I started teaching in 1993, right after that first video came out. People started asking me, do I teach, and this and that. And so I started teaching a lot in California and Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. And I was doing these little mini sessions with a 4-hour class with 9 students twice a day. So I was teaching 18 people a day for 3 days in this town I'd roll into. And some people from the first day would roll over into the second or the third day. But I was teaching like 50 people a weekend and doing that 2 weekends a month. So real quickly, I ended up teaching, over 100 people a month. And so the first year, I probably had 600-700 people that I had taught, and then the second, third, and fourth year. And then I've ended up teaching with a lot of doing demonstrations at the Glass Art Societies. I demoed in Amsterdam. I demoed in Boston. There's just a variety of places that I've done with Glass Art Society. And then I ran into Morroco Toyoshima, and he started being a conduit for bringing people to my best bead shows. In '96, I established a series of glass bead shows called the Best Bead Shows. And the people that were exhibiting in the shows was Kevin O'Grady, Lord Stump, Mylan Townsend. I mean, there was, and towards the end, when I sold the shows, I had 118 lampworkers in the show. And it was in Tucson. It was like a monster glass mecca. And I was teaching just all over the place. Glass was booming in the 90s. And then the Japanese just started to come over, and I was the first one to bring them over in mass with, and it wasn't Akihiro and crew first. It was Hide Yukazawa was the first guy, or Hide Yakazawa, I believe. And he came over with a guy named Mr. Kim, who was Korean, and they did our show, and I met them through Morroco Toyoshima. And then Morroco started getting word out and would come over with a group of 5 or 6 of the Japanese, and finally Akihiro came over with Taksan and a bunch of the other crazy guys. And then Morroco said, hey, we're doing this glass festival in Japan in 2005. And it's the first glass festival there, and would you like to come over and teach and stuff like this? And I said, sure. And in 1964, I had started studying Shotokan karate, and then my instructor only spoke Japanese. So from 1964 to 1969, I was taking 20 hours of instruction in Japanese karate. So I had a good knowledge of command Japanese, like right hand, fast, stomach. Chudan, migi desu, hayaku. My right hand, your stomach, fast. It's a conversation, but it's kind of, broken up.
Right.
So I learned enough words and stuff like that. So when I went to teach in Japan in 2005, I actually went over there. It might have been 2003 or something like that. But my first demonstration was 90 minutes, and it was entirely in Japanese. I prepared 33 sentences with perfect syntax in Japanese where they totally understood that I knew what I was saying, and it was a prepared speech. And then at the end, this Japanese guy in the audience, there's like 500 lampworkers there, stands up and asks me a question. And I said, sumimasen, like, I'm sorry, watashi wa nihongo ga skoshi hanashimasen, which means, I'm sorry, but I do not understand Japanese. This is after giving a lecture for 90 minutes in perfect Japanese.
That's so funny.
So I just owned the house after that. They just all broke up and all. But the talent that I saw there, and the first time I went to the Kobe Museum, the Kobe Bead Museum is like it starts off a little like the Corning Museum of the bead section, where it's got all the ancient beads, and it's got the Roman artifact beads, the Merides, the lion face guy and all that. But they had these beautiful old museum stuff for about 20 feet, this big long case on your right, and then you look into this wall in front of you, and it's like 500, 600 individual beads made by people that basically nobody knew who the hell they were, unless you were Japanese and they were your friends and all. But when I saw that, I realized that of these 500 or 600 beads here by just generic Japanese lampworkers on these volcano torches that have no focal point, I says every one of those beads is equal to or better at that point than anything of 99% of all the American bead makers. It's like they don't understand that they are so much better than the world. And if all the Americans saw this, they'd just hang up all their torches and go home. But I was blown away. And this is Mr. Miyamoto is the one that owned the Bead Museum in Kobe, and he's the one that organized the first of the Japanese international glass festivals.
Man, that's fascinating.
But I ended up teaching there for 3 times, and then I also taught in Australia with glass, and then pretty much anywhere you run into somebody with a torch, I'm out there showing you what I like to do or showing off.
Right. I think what's interesting too with this whole kind of underlying the kind of dichotomy of glass artists is a lot of what we do is improvisation. It's like we have this A to Z goal of how to get from point A to point Z in a sense to finish our piece, but it never goes the same way. No matter if you're making 10 pieces that are the same thing, it's never exactly the same every single time. We have to improvise and let the glass do its thing. And it's just listening to your story. It's you've come a long life improvising in a sense, but you've also have this founding like love of knowledge, and learning technique and skills. Even just going to Japan and just being able to hold an audience and talk to them for 90 minutes, even though you didn't know fluent Japanese, but you still were able to improvise and then capture the audience and then get this reputation now and be involved with them. But seeing your story and your life, and I look at other artists, including myself. And, a lot of times we're improvising as we're going along. And like you're saying with the soft glass beads over in Mexico at Epcot, over at Disney World, our station there now is strictly just bead making. And a couple times I've had to cover some shifts there. And I've been doing this for 17 years, all strictly Boro, never really worked any kind of Moretti or soft glass ever. And I've had to go there and use it and just improvise and make a fucking mess on the bench trying to figure this glass out, But like you're saying, the people watching you, they have no idea that you don't know what the hell you're doing, It's yep. Kind of, it's fun. So I think it's, the glass artist personality, there's so many of them, but we all have this kind of underlying, thing of this being able to improvise in our careers and in life, it seems like. And those that are successful are the ones that can pivot and fine tune and really find their way. I don't know. It's interesting. And too with your bead show, it's amazing to hear about all the glass artists, whether it's in the pipe industry or just in the fine art industry, that have come out of that bead show.
People that came through my show there, like starting in the mid 1990s, probably from 1996 until maybe 2000, there was a 4 or 5 year period there that it was just incredible. And people that were doing the show there that didn't have a name at all was Devin Somerville, Micro,
mm-hmm.
and then I got his other buddy that's right up there in Madison also. My brain just left it there. And also, who's Lost Coast Glass? Jared DeLong.
Oh yeah.
And then Harold Cooney, and then Josh Simpson. Josh, who does the marbles. Josh Simpson, the big marbles that makes it. No, not him. There's oh my God, Josh that does. He was one of the first ones that did Ratticellis and stuff like that.
Okay.
But then Dave Strobel and Mike Warren, and there's all these people that in the late 90s and early 2000 were doing my bead shows, because Tucson had blossomed into this thing where that's where all these buyers were, and then that's where all these people were that are showing, and also that, hey, you know, there's going to be 100 glass blowers here in this one building, and I want to be in that mix. And the thing just kind of took on a life of its own with the bead shows. And then I expanded that to where I also had a show in Boston, and then in Hawaii, and in Albuquerque. And then in 1998, I had the Albuquerque bead show, and then by 2000, it had gotten really big. And in 2002, I had the first of the major flame-offs in Albuquerque. It was the 2002 Albuquerque Flame-Off, and there were 6 torches running for 3 days for 12 hours, and there was 300 glass blowers that came in to watch this. And the people that were in this first flame-off was Mylan Townsend, Doug Rimschneider, Barry Laffler, Harold Cooney, myself, Donnie Hantz, Deline Peralta won the flame-off, just beat the hell out of everybody with this Jerry Garcia hollow dichroic hand with a fairy dancing in it. And that was the very first of the flame-offs. There had been a smaller one that Tom Philobaum had that was in kind of piggybacking the Glass Art Society conference that was in maybe 97 or 98 in Tucson. And so they had this little thing that kind of came out, and it wasn't really a full-blown, you know, flame-off or anything like that. But out of this flame-off in 2002, I produced 32 hours of footage that we edited down into a documentary of the event, and then a 2-hour DVD or video of the beads being made, and of the marbles being made, and of the sculptures and goblets. And I had arranged with a woman at the Raquel Library, the Corning Museum of Glass, that they would accept as a entire collection all the marbles that were made from the 17 different people that were competing in the marble flame-off. So they knew when they came in that everybody that competed, their marble was going to be donated en masse to Corning, and that they received a letter thank you for your submission to the Corning Museum of Glass. And so all these people that just joined up to be in the marble competition had their marbles that are displayed now even at the Raquel Library in Corning as a group as to the best marbles that were made by contemporary marble makers in the year 2002.
Interesting. Hell yeah. So, you know, it's what was that? I was going to ask you something. I forgot the hell it was. Completely lost it. So, with the bead show itself, so you sold that in 2008, I'm seeing?
I sold that to John Iannucci in 2008, and he turned around and just fucking killed it. Because, I mean, in my opinion, he's just not good with people. He bought the show. He had worked with Labrador, or he had worked with, I forget what was the company that ran a few other bead shows in Pennsylvania and stuff like this from a corporate standpoint. And so he bought my shows, and when he bought it, there was 118 lamp workers. There were 17 tool people. I mean, it was a jewel. And he immediately increased all the booth fees by 1/2. He was like not a good people person. Notice how I didn't just flat out call him an asshole.
Right.
And then, but him and his sidekick just killed it. And the last time I went through the show there, maybe 2 years ago, there were 6 lamp workers.
Crazy.
6.
No shit.
And that show had been known for, you want to see glass, and you know, it was sculptures, and it was beads, marbles, pendants, anything glass ended up being in that show, and it was the cream of the crop. And then there's something else, or you got all these stuff, you know, there's eBay and other places like that selling, and then all the local bead societies started having shows and stuff like this. But when I started in '96 with that bead show, if you wanted beads, you pretty much went to Tucson. And there were, at that same point, maybe 50 or 60 other major events at the same 2-week period that I had my 6-day show in the middle of. So there's 250,000 people in Tucson for this 6-week period from middle of January to the end of February. And during that period, there's a sweet 2 weeks that almost everything's open. And then within that 2 weeks, there's this 6-day period where every show is open. And there are circus tents, and there are huge pavilions, and it's beyond having the convention center be used for a show or hotel ballrooms. You look at this to Tucson from the sky, and you see these huge complexes of people at these 50 or 60 major events. And some of these things had 3,000 exhibitors selling gems and minerals. So for me to throw the Bead Show right in the mix of all these people already in town was an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, because I remember seeing a documentary a couple years ago about an event. I don't know if it happens at the same time, but it's an international event where they bring weavers and artists from all over the world, and they come to this one location, and everybody sits there for like a week, and they show off their wares, and it allows them to continue to feed their families and their villages and their towns. I mean, even really when it comes down to it, through their art that's being promoted out there in the Arizona area. I think it was in Tucson. I remember seeing it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Now, there's just tons of stuff there with. I mean, there's so many people there in Tucson, and there's an awful lot of the shows in Tucson during Gem Fair that are aimed at RV type stuff and retirement and things. There's a lot of retirees that come through there at the middle of all these other things that are having to do with gem and minerals. In the 1970s, they started having these shows in Quartzsite, and then eventually into Tucson. There were lapidary things with old retirees that were playing around with gems and minerals, and somebody would have a diamond saw blade, and they'd put it up on a gem saw, and they'd cut up some geodes and say, "Hey, that's cool." And then that kind of morphed from the 70s into where they started having the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show, and then it got big and big and big, and it got to be one of the largest open-air events in the world. I mean, there's 250,000 people each day that normally wouldn't be there, except for this, 2-week period.
Wow, that's awesome. Huh, Jesus. And so at what point in time did you get involved with AGI?
AGI, I ran into Tom Donner. He was a refrigerator and appliance repairman, and like if your refrigerator stopped working and needed Freon for the freezer or whatever, but and he'd always wanted to wear glass, and he ran into a guy at a flea market or a craft show that was working glass, and Tom wanted the guy to show him some stuff, and he says, "Oh, I don't teach this and that. Hey, there's this guy, look up this guy Lewis Wilson." And so he come along and he found my videos on doing sculptures, and so he taught himself how to work glass from my videos. And then so I guess right now this is maybe the 16th year, so maybe AGI the first year they actually called it Pipe Stock because it was mostly aimed at pipe makers. Right. And it was behind Tom's house. What do you say?
I was just clearing my throat.
So Tom had this first thing kind of in a field behind his house, and then he had his workshop that he worked in with like 3 or 4 torches, and people pretty much set up out in the middle of nowhere in Hilliards, Pennsylvania, and it was this big group of mostly stoner pipe guys. And then they realized that if he changed the name to Art Glass Invitational, it would probably get more recognition and have a better vibe, and wouldn't get as much of the admiration from the local police, right, who had heard about this thing that was all pipe driven. And so, and this is the point too in 2000 when the melting pot or the glass discussion group was starting to evolve, and it was driving all this thing, hey, where the pipe maker's going to learn stuff, this and that. So it came about into maybe the second or third year of AGI, where they built this building, or maybe even fourth or fifth year. And then Tom had always really loved that I was a teacher and that I had broken the glass ceiling and had wanted to teach instead of keep all these secrets and everything, because there are no secrets. It's just, there's assholes like Bill Triggs that don't say, get out of here, like I've never seen a torch.
Right.
So I was the anti-Bill Triggs. And the only reason people might not maybe know that name is because I use it as an example of what not to be. And so Tom just thought that I was the best thing in the world, and he dedicated the main building at AGI to myself. And so I flew out there and I retired my top hat. And I've been wearing top hats since maybe 1998, when I was had moved. My show, the first 2 years, was in Tucson at a music center, and then I moved it into a Howard Johnson hotel, where we took up all the hotel rooms and then tents in the inner courtyard, and the show just took off incredibly well. And I had done a Renaissance fair, a Christmas Renaissance fair, the Christmas beforehand, in '97, and I didn't have an outfit, so they'd force you to buy for $10 this cheesy top hat, just so that you look like you're, Edwardian or Dickinsonian. So for some reason, I had the top hat with me, and the show, people were selling out left and right, and it was just booming. And so I just put this top hat on because I was feeling goofy, and everybody said, "Wow, you look really good in it," and this and that. And so I had the top hat there, and then maybe a year later, I was in Portland at an antique store, and I saw a gray top hat that was Moss Brothers, which is a rental company out of London. And so I bought that one, and I have 6 different top hats now. And so I started being known as the top hat became the logo for the show. Yeah. And so I've been wearing top hats now for probably over 20 years. And for me, they work.
I think it's a great look on you, man. With everything, yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's fascinating, and it goes along with your Carney background too, with the circus stuff. It's a whole fun little kind of merging of all your talents that you have into your personality. I think it fits perfectly. Oh yeah. Hell yeah. So it's kind of moving forward on it. Have you had any health issues at all? You find from being exposed to the glass for so long?
Actually, I've had. Actually pretty good. A lot of people wonder, how are your eyes? Because I just used didymium filters for doing boro. For my first 20 years of boro was clear boro, no color, so I didn't have the spikes, with your eyes, with using, especially like, gold and silver fuming, or working with color, and you have all that stuff that damages your eyes. Yeah. So I've been fortunate there. When I moved back to Albuquerque in 1981 and started doing way larger pieces. And it's when I started doing the really larger pieces, I really jumped in and just started doing these things with 1-inch rod and making really limited edition pieces. And it started with getting ready to do these Indian dancers, and I started doing them bigger and bigger. And I wasn't working out. I had fought tournament karate from 1964 all the way to 1982, that I was in tournaments, and I'd had over 60 fractures. All my fingers and toes, my right knee twice, my right ankle, 4 ribs, and knocked out 3 times in the ring. It's like I got my black belt in '69 and then fought competitively until '82. And so I had paid my dues with fractures and with karate. So when I come into the thing with being healthy, I'm fine and dandy, except I started doing these really massive pieces. And what it did, because I'm holding it in my left hand and sculpting with my right, if you looked at me without a T-shirt on from my back, my left side of my back was overdeveloped, and my right wasn't as much. And what it did, the muscles shifted around my scapula and in the thoracic area of my back, and I developed a trigger point that was directly under my, it would be the mid-clavicular line, like the middle part of your collarbone. But on the back side, there was this little spot that I'd be working, and it would be like somebody stuck an ice pick right in my back, and then it would make my hand open up, and I would drop whatever was in my hand, and my left arm would flail out to the side. And so I went to the doctor, and he said, "Wow, you've got a trigger point here." And I said, "Well, what do we do about it?" He said, "Well, I'm going to just, put a cortisone injection into the trigger spot, and it actually worked. And I'd go in once a month. He'd go in and he would inject cortisone into this nerve that didn't like that I started doing big pieces. Well, a year to a date from getting the injections with the cortisone, we were using a mole on my back as a reference as to where to inject to get the trigger spot. The mole started growing feet and mutating and turning black, and it turned into melanoma. And they said that, I mean, after the fact, that the melanoma was set off by the cortisone as an injection into my body, and that there's a significant history enough that cortisone injections can make a mole that is precancerous go into full-blown melanoma. So they ended up taking 35 square inches of my back out.
Holy shit.
So there was this scar that's 9 inches, but when it started, it was 9 inches and 5 inches wide, like a big diamond. And then they undermined it and pulled it off. And then for a half a year, my elbows were braced behind me so that I didn't pull this whole thing open.
Jeez.
So that was my main medical issue.
Yeah.
So I'm not, that's not much of a problem there. So other than that, I've been healthy all my glass life. I'm probably one of the old guys that has no ventilation in my studio. What I have is a 16-foot clear-story building that's 40 feet long and 16 feet wide with a 16-foot clear story up top, and I just have the windows open at the top, and I have windows in front of me and behind me open, and it has a natural convection of heat that just goes straight up. So everybody that's ever been in there, they said, "Oh my God, this is incredible." I mean, there's no bad air or anything like this because I'm in a very large studio, and no problem with venting out any bad gas.
Nice. Yeah, that was when I was first hired by Arribas. That was part of my concern, was that they don't have the ventilation there. And I was one day I accidentally I had my tool bag under my bench when I was over at Epcot, and I dropped a flower petal I was making into my bag and actually caught my bag on fire, which is stupid and crazy, but I put it out, but this whole plume of smoke came pouring out from under my bench, and it immediately went out the store. And it made me feel better that I was seeing, like you're saying, this convection of airflow that was naturally happening because of the design of the building itself. So kind of relieved some stress I was dealing with, but we still use powders and Fritz and stuff. I don't anymore myself, but I know some of the guys still do. So it's still one of those concerns dealing with, getting into the dust and stuff you'd have to deal with, particles.
Well, in 1997 or 98, the International Society of Glass Bead Makers, they had their conference in Corning. And what they brought in is a team of workers, scientists, maybe 4 of them from OSHA. And this was right at the beginning where people were starting, most of the normal lamp workers were just getting into gold and silver fuming. I mean, Snotty and all these other guys in the pipe world, had been, fuming left and right. But more and more people were interested in gold and silver fuming. So the organizers for the Society of Glass Bead Makers at Corning invited OSHA in, and they came in during our demos, and I was one of the ones that they strapped these little things to your forehead to measure temperature and stuff like this. And I was very much aware when I started working glass, because when I started working glass in 1992 or 72, and then started going back and forth to Disney, I was asking the doctors at the hospital I work with, what are your, health concerns about working with glass? And the first thing that pops up is silicosis, if you're batching your own glass. Yep. And then the second thing with glass blowers, cataracts, because of rebound heat. And that's a furnace thing mostly, with getting hit with the massive heat. And it makes the water in your eye, the vitreous humerus, expand faster than the eye, and it stretches the cornea, and you get cataracts. And then the other thing was carpal tunnel. And the other thing was back problems from the way you position your body and all this sort of stuff. So they brought in these OSHA guys to really delve into what we're doing to our bodies, and they kind of looked at it. They said, okay, didymium lens, sodium flare, innocent, And then some fool stood up and they started talking about silver fuming and gold fuming. And these guys from OSHA came in knowing that that was going to be the big kicker. And they were waiting for the first stoner asshole to stump up and say, well, I've been fuming for such and such, and I have no health problems, and blah, blah, blah. So you wait for the first ignorant fool to stand up, tell you that I'm not going to catch any disease because I wash my hands, shit like that.
Yep.
So the first thing they do is they say, okay, what happens, why are you, not getting anything? And the guy says, well, I've got an exhaust fan 2 feet in front of my torch that pulls, 2,000 cubic feet per minute, blah, blah, blah. And the guy says, how fast does that exhaust fan go? And I says, well, it sucks air out like you can't believe. The guy says, is it 200 miles an hour? The guy said, what? He says, is your exhaust fan 200 miles an hour? And no, I don't think so. I said, well, as soon as you put a little piece of gold into a flame and it vaporizes, the molecular structure breaks down and the gold atoms are released at 200 miles an hour. And silver is fairly comparable too. So you say, okay, I'm going to do some gold and silver fuming. You're talking heavy metals. You're talking, I'm ventilated. So no, you don't need to be ventilated. You need to be masked. You need to have a vapor mask on that's going to catch any micron of gold or silver, because as soon as that hits the flame, it doesn't go the way your flame goes away from you. It comes out as a quark in space where a star explodes,
right.
and particles go in every direction from the mass. And your mouth is one of those directions. And so it vaporizes, and those little gold particles go everywhere, and you see this fume hitting your glass, and you say, oh, that's really cool. And what you're not seeing is the gold that's going in your mouth and into your bloodstream and into your body and stuff like that. So the whole thing on, hey, I've got really good ventilation. You don't have 200 mile an hour ventilation. So basically, you need to man up and understand what you're working with. And then they did little readings on our foreheads to see how hot we were getting. My rebound heat on a lot of the stuff I do is 120, 130 degrees, just where I work in close, and I'm using some 1-inch rod, stuff like that. But everybody was really blown away by, sweet little innocent gold and silver, what's it doing, and that it moves at an incredibly fast rate. So that's something that we learned from that. And the Bead Society thing there, in 1993, they had a gallery show at the Bead Museum in Prescott, Arizona, and everybody was sending beads in to be included in this group show. And then all of a sudden people said, hey, why don't we go to this thing? And that's how in August of 1993, there were 80 glassblowers that showed up in Prescott, Arizona, for this bead show that was affiliated with the Bead Museum. And then that weekend, we founded the Society of Glass Bead Makers, SGA, and then it became the International Society of Glass Bead Makers. But the first group of lamp workers that were in a big group, where there's 80 of us there, I had been teaching a day before in Tucson, and I had a manifold and 8 torches and 4 or 5 cylinders and propane and ovens, and I set up during the bead show on Saturday at 2 o'clock. This guy came through and said, I really want to learn how to make beads, and me and my wife, and we're here in town at the college, Prescott Community College, and running the ceramic lab. And so I told the guy, I said, if you can let me and some friends come over tonight to your ceramic lab, we'll set up some torches. I'll teach you how to make beads. So we had 80 people gang into this college ceramic lab, and that was the first group flame. It wasn't a flame-off, but it was the first open torch session that anybody had ever been in.
Wow. And
there were 80 people there with 6 torches. Kevin O'Grady was there, Brian Kirkfleet, Mikey France, Patty France, Emiko Sawamoto, Emily Clark, myself. There's a lot of people that grew on to be incredibly well known. But it was like the first thing that all started with the bead movement. But I was one of the founding members of that. And then maybe in 2008, I was given a Hall of Flame, which is like their Lifetime Achievement Award. At the conference in Oakland, I got the Hall of Flame Award just for everything that I've done with glass and with beads and with the promotion and with the teaching and all.
Yeah. Man, that's fantastic. And I'm glad you brought up the OSHA stuff with the silver and gold, because that's always been a concern I've had. And I mean, I've fumed silver 100,000 times, you know, and I've even seeing guys that work Claire Barrow doing figurines and stuff that still use it. And it's always been a concern. The gold, not so much as the silver, but I started hearing stories of guys that were having neurological disorders from the gold exposure, like you're saying, getting into their bloodstream and stuff. And I've shied away from it, besides the fact that it's so fucking expensive, but I've really stayed away from it. So I'm glad you're bringing this up, because part of my concern, which is what got me starting the show, was this whole new generation of glassblowers and lampworkers out there that are learning from videos and learning bad habits, not necessarily from all the videos, but there's not always the truth out there in terms of the techniques and how to do this stuff. And I'm glad you brought that up, because part of one of the things I'm gonna try to promote is to, like you're saying, with the measuring the heat that you're getting exposed to. And I heard a show years ago, a podcast. This chef was talking about how he knew how hot the kitchen was because of his thermometer he had in his pocket, and it was on his chest pocket on his shirt. And it was 120, 130 degrees in these kitchens and stuff. And I know our studios are the same way, and it's like we're basically sitting inside of an oven cooking ourselves. And it's not healthy, and people don't really can't really grasp that, because they're so caught up in the romance, quote unquote, of being a glass blower. But in all reality, there's so many other issues we have to be concerned about and pay attention to. So like yourself, you could do this for 50 plus years, and like you're saying too, with the dealing with the shoulder overdevelopment of muscles. I had that same exact issue. I went and saw a massage therapist, and she's like, "Why are you standing so weird?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'd never noticed it." And then she pushed my left shoulder down, and I could then tell that my whole left side was overdeveloped, and I didn't realize it because of the years of doing it, and I was having numbness in my hands and pinched nerves and all kind of shit. And she was telling me that the same kind of thing I had an overlapping tendon kind of flipped itself around and was pinching off the nerve in my shoulder, which was then causing my hands to fall asleep at night when I slept. And there's nothing worse than not being able to sleep because your hands are falling asleep. And it wasn't because of carpal tunnel; it was because of this overdevelopment of these shoulder muscles. And over the past 6 months or so, I've been jump roping and started as my fitness routine. And I've really found that by jump roping, it's allowing me to have a almost ambidextrous motion, using the jump rope, which is causing me to develop muscles that are very similar in size and shape, and stretching out my wrists and everything else in the process. I'm going to start promoting this jump roping thing, because I really think people don't think to stretch or to stop, and just you got to take a break and stretch out, but pay attention to how much you're using one side over the other, or how you stand and your posture and positioning. And so I'm glad you're bringing all this stuff up, because once again, I've had a lot of newer guys, not newer but pipe makers on the show, but I've also wanted to bring on artists like you who have been instrumental in educating us and have this legacy that's continuing, that myself personally want to continue your legacy through this knowledge. So thank you for that. I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Cool.
Yeah, man. So
one other thing on body position and working. I remember maybe as far back as 10 or 15 years ago, Robert Mickelson was starting discussions mostly on the melting pot with do you stand or sit while you work? And then a lot of it has to do with the mechanics of your body. And there's an awful lot of guys I know that work standing, and I've always worked pretty much sitting and all. And but I really come from a background of anatomy and physiology of how the human body works, and how you can let the body know that you're smarter than the way that it's going to respond to what you do. And the thing is that if you're doing a lot of detail work, and say if you're right-handed, and I'm holding my piece in my left hand, and if I'm sitting, I brace my elbows down, and then I have my torch ahead of me, so that when I move my hands forward with my elbows both on the table, then I have really good detail work. And if you're standing and your elbows are not hitting a table, then you're holding something in your left hand, and then you're doing detail work with your right hand, that there is the muscle group from your left wrist, your elbow, your shoulder, and then across the back to the spine, and then the other across the back to the spine, shoulder, elbows, and wrist. You're going through 8 muscle groups to manipulate the glass. So if you're standing up and you're doing that, that's pretty much like I'm going to try and thread a needle in my left hand with a thread that's in my right hand, and I'm going through 8 muscle groups. If I brace my elbows down and touch the table, I'm eliminating 6 muscle groups. I'm only dealing with my wrists. And then I have eliminated 6 of 8 variables on being able to be dedicated to detail work, so that all these guys that are standing up, they don't realize what they're doing is and they're usually standing up with a small table and a brick on it and your torch and all this sort of stuff, and their elbows aren't braced, and they're losing the ability to get better detail for standing up. It's better on their body when your torso is in that vertical position. And what I work, I'm not hunched over like an old man or anything like this. I just I'm more relaxed sitting down, and I've done this now for 44 years or so. So it's like I'm kind of understanding how my body works, but I still do a lot of stuff with really acute detail that I can't do it standing up, trying to thread a needle in the air.
Yeah.
So a lot of people aren't aware of that they're giving up something when they're standing up. They're giving up the ability to do better detail by bracing their elbows. Yeah,
I completely agree. I know myself, I go back and forth depending if I'm making larger scale pieces. I stand just to help let my body absorb the weight, but if I'm doing, like you're saying, detail stuff, I'm right there doing it. Like I sit and watch Miguel do his running stitch work, and he sits there like a freaking robot for 6-8 hours, doing his running stitch, and he's in the same posture, same position, elbows on the table, up and down, up, doing his motion, and it's consistent. And he's also been able to do it for this long because of the consistency, and learning proper body mechanics is so important. I myself as well, I have a medical background. I was a certified EMT for a while, and I've always been fascinated with medicine. I actually wanted to get into neurology when I was a kid, and then I was introduced to glassblowing, which has changed my life. But
no, I enjoyed being a medic. I mean, I've probably sutured, 4,000 or 5,000 people. I've even sutured myself 3 times. I've sutured my daughter a couple of times. I've done anything from somebody shot in the gut with a shotgun to cardiac arrest, to anything that would come into emergency room. For 3 years I was there. The last 2 years I ran it, and it was me and 2 other corpsmen and a doctor if you needed him. And I enjoyed medicine. It's really a high adrenaline rush, and you never know what's going to come in. But when you see somebody come in that had their surfboard, go over, and the skag, which is the fin on the surfboard, cuts their shoulder open, and it's always they fall off the surfboard. They know they're going to get hit, and they go to dive, and so their head's down and their feet are down, but the arch of their shoulders up, and the skag always gets them right across between the shoulder and the neck, and usually it's deep. It goes subcutaneous quite nicely, and so you're looking at this filleted person, and then you go and you do subcutaneous suturing, and then you do a running stitch, or you do interrupted or whatever. But there's a thing of beauty on sewing somebody back together that is just awesome, and it's like, my God, look at this piece of art that I just did here. And it's like I've sewed pretty much any part of the human body you could think of. I mean, anywhere from, there's a lot of weird shit that happens out there that comes into an emergency room. Like on TLC Network about, sex drove me into the ER, and, somebody with a razor blade went after their cheating boyfriend. I've sewn a few of those up too.
Yeah, man. It's funny you say that, because I myself have always been fascinated with suturing. My mom was a nurse when I grew up, and doing my stuff. And I worked at Subway for a couple of years, and I put a knife through my hand, and the doctor was asking me, you want to be knocked out? I mean, it was a pretty bad, like almost completely through my hand. And he's like, how do you want to go about this? I'm like, I want to watch you do this. So he just shoved his needle, gave me some numbing stuff in my hand, and I sat there and watched the whole process. And like you're saying, it is a thing of beauty to watch something that's completely fucked up be replaced and repaired, going back to almost completely brand new. Now I do have some issues myself in my it's in my left palm of underneath my thumb, that I've from scar tissue that is definitely I'm starting to feel it now, even more so with some pain and tenderness in that area from the years of lamp working and, stretching that tendon out, holding bigger glass. But other than that, man, it's amazing how it's healed up. And, like you're saying, I've seen some crazy shit come into the ER and from people in their 80s that you would just like, what the hell were they thinking kind of stuff, but it makes you think. It makes you be, again, improvising in a sense because you have some knowledge and some skill set that you can improvise. And then you bring someone back from the dead just about and sit them up and they look brand new. It's all said and done. So it's for those that don't understand that, it's definitely like I agree. And nowadays with plastic surgery, I mean, it's amazing the things that are going on with medicine. It's mind blowing. So neat. So, yeah, man. So one more thing I want to talk about, and then I want to get us into our little lightning round here, and then we can wrap this up. And I know you got some. I don't want to keep you all day, but I'm really excited to see that you're now involved in the Torch Talk group. And myself, got in there last year when there was around 1,000 people, or just under 1,000, and I was drawn to it because not only am I a teacher, but also it's a group of all these new glass artists that are coming in. And it was a group that was set up to where people can't talk shit. Everybody has to be non-judgmental and share knowledge and helpful. And then all of a sudden, here's Lewis Wilson coming in, and you're sharing these techniques, like the skeleton thing you were doing, which was fascinating. So what was it that drew you into that group? Was it just the same thing, like the education side?
It's just marketing.
Yeah.
I've been a teacher all my life, and so the glass thing is just an extension of that. I think that if I have the ability to teach somebody something, that I think it should be given out there. And the stuff that I do, I don't sell through any galleries. I've mostly eliminated all the shows that I've been doing. I'm 67 years old, so I'm getting Social Security, and I might make 3 or 4 hours on the Torch a day and make $200 or $300, and that money goes into a fund just to travel. Like Barb and I went to Paris for a week last year, first class pretty much, and
nice.
Had an incredible thing, and it was all from just making glass and selling it, because my Social Security from me and my wife takes care of all our bills. So anything I sell in glass is just for travel and stuff like that. So the way I market myself is by letting people know that I'm good enough to look and to follow, and that I like to do all these sequential pictures. If you go into my Facebook page, maybe going back 3 years, I probably have 100 sequential series of usually at 28 pictures, because Facebook will allow me to do an album of 28 pictures in sequence and push a button and they all go up as a tutorial. And so I've been doing that. And then on YouTube under Lewis C. Wilson, I've probably got 80 or 90 videos of me finishing up some rather large pieces. And it's usually, some of these things are an hour long, but there's a lot of them that are 4 and 5 and 6 minutes. Just me putting the finishing touches on a limited edition piece that's a monster. So I'm all over there on YouTube, and then also on I've got a lot of my work is at lewiscwilson.com, and my teaching schedule is mostly I'm out there letting people know that. So for maybe 15 years, my job was to run that Bead Show, and it sucked all my energy. And I was doing 6 shows a year, in 6 different states, and Hawaii, and traveling and teaching and all this sort of stuff. And it wasn't allowing me to perfect my craft anymore. So the past 8 or 9 years since I sold the shows, I've been able to get better. And when I met Barb, my wife, maybe about 8 years ago, we started dating from Florida to New Mexico. We'd go to New Orleans occasionally and go around through the galleries and all. And we ran into a retrospective of Lalique, and then also of the bronze masters of Chaparras and all these 1920s bronze workers, Art Deco stuff. And so I bought some books on Art Deco, and my wife's influence on me through the art there has made me start doing a lot more of the human form and a lot of the deco type stuff and the human form and the dancers and the 1920s type stuff. Yeah. So what I've been doing now is getting my craft better and reintroducing myself to a whole bunch of people. Like my first thing into the torch talk. I mean, those guys, they don't really have a clue, because my videos were out there, 25 years ago.
Right.
These guys, they're just going to YouTube or they're going to anybody next door. When I started in 1972, there was maybe one other guy in Florida that I knew, a guy named Bill Starbuck, and he bought glass from Johnny Hatsima and Jose Salazar that were from Tecate, Mexico, and they would come up from a glass factory with 2 U-Hauls back-to-back, piggybacking mortar. They'd come up with 100,000 pieces of glass, supplying Disney World and Six Flags and circus, all this sort of stuff. But they would also give it to these guys that did the malls, like Bill Starbuck. And the biggest joke in the industry from the 70s and 80s and stuff was you'd see a glass blower in a mall, and he's just got a little propane flame there because, he's going to get back to work in a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And
you really look at it, there's no oxygen cylinder, there's this and that. It's a fake. The guy's running a propane flame to make you think he's going to be working soon. And then it's an in again, out again, fin again. It's a one-day wonder. You need to go on, you make a yard, $100. This is all carny talk. When I learned glass, it was right in the middle of the carny stuff.
Yeah.
When I was hanging out with all the circus people down there, I forget the name of the town that is between Tampa and Sarasota, and it's where all the circus people retired to, where you got Alligator Man and all these weird people with weird stuff that was in the sideshows.
Yep.
Where I worked was pretty much one of the last sideshows in America.
Huh.
And all they didn't have was a geek next door. And when I started working glass, a geek was not a nerd that's a computer. A geek was a guy that was tarred and feathered, and he would kill chickens by biting their necks off as a circus performer.
Holy shit.
And that's what a geek is. If you look up GEEK, and that's where they had the glass blowers too. They had the glass blowers in the range in the circuses and county fairs and the sideshows with people that are biting chickens' heads off and stuff like that. That's kind of where we evolved.
Crazy. Yeah. Because I know at I think it's Bradenton, maybe. I know that they have the Ringling Brothers Museum down there.
Bradenton is that same area.
Yeah.
But there's a retirement village of like trailers and stuff, and it's got all these weird. I think Lobster Boy still lives there right now.
I know where. Yeah, it's like it's outside of Lakeland area. I drive through it all the time. Actually, there's still signs up actually as a destination for people to go there, even to today. Yeah, it was like the retirement community trailer park for all the retired carnies. Man, that'd be a crazy-ass place to go visit. Holy shit. You got the bearded lady and everything else going on there. It's so funny. So, all right, man. Well, let's go ahead and transition ourselves into our lightning round. I like to call it the crash in the kiln rounds, the quick round. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors, and we'll come back and we'll get this lightning round started. This episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show is brought to you by the Flow Magazine. Since its inception, the focus of the Flow has been to provide a bond among members of the lampworking community. In every issue, you can enjoy great content with the hottest artists and cutting-edge techniques using the latest industry products. These features, along with the continuation of our Women in Glass edition, Glasscraft Emerging Artist Awards, inspiring gallery showcases, dynamic general interest articles, as well as health and safety information, make the Flow the leading international lampworking journal. For more information or to subscribe to the Flow, go to theflowmagazine.com. That's theflowmagazine.com. Yeah, man, so the lightning round consists of, or the crash in the kiln round, I should say, consists of 6 questions. And if you want to give me a 30 to 60-second answer, and you can expound upon them as well if you'd like. And the first question I always like to ask, and for you this should be interesting, is there any living glass artist that you have not worked with before? Who is it and why?
Probably Giannini Toso, that I've studied 3 times with Lucio. One was for 10 days in Morroco in his studio, and 2 other 5-day classes at Fran's Art Glass. But so I've worked with Santini and Lucio. I've actually hired them to give classes during my shows and all. But I've never met or worked with Giannini Toso or Gino. and he's the one that does the mostly known for the chess set at Corning that has the Jewish players against the Christian players. But he's very old school Italian, traditionally taught and everything like that. But I'd probably enjoy working with him some.
Nice. So I know you've worked with clear most of your career, but now you're, actually kind of a side note. I meant to ask you this earlier. At what point in time in your career did you start actually working with color?
I actually, I got a maybe about a 10-inch rod of cobalt when John Deacon, who was the glassblower in Sarasota on Tamiami Trail, he'd been there across from the Ringling Museum for many years. And Robert Mickelson and I would go to see him when maybe every 2 weeks we would go to Citrus Towers and sell stuff to Gene Bouts. We'd sell stuff to John Deacon in Sarasota, a guy named Chris Christensen that was in Clearwater. But Mickelson and I, depending on whose car was working that day, every 2 weeks would get in our car from St. Pete, and then we'd go and sell our glass. And the thing down there with John Deacon, he died, and we heard about it. And then I was the first one that was crass enough to call his wife and say, "Oh, I'm sorry that John has died, but that rod of cobalt he had, and also a rod of uranium that was it was ceiling glass. It was K33. Okay. And this wasn't like the Illuminati now. I mean, it was Corning hardcore uranium glow glass. And but I went in and bought some of his equipment and glass rods from him. And this was probably, I'd have to say it might have been like 1978 or 79 that I got this 10-inch rod of cobalt. And then I found out years later that Corning, for the people that did their demos in front of the Corning Museum of Glass, they had somebody that did little animals and stuff, that the Corning glass shop would produce 2 pounds a month of cobalt for the guy doing demos, so that if you did a little elephant or a cat or a dog, you could use a dot of cobalt for the eyes, just so it would stand out more. So I got this rod of cobalt and a rod of uranium that was, in 78 or so. It wasn't until 1993 or 94 that Paul Troutman had North Star up and running fairly nicely, and that my sculptural glassblowing series that I came out with in 94, 95 of the 10 hours on borosilicate sculpture, that it had a little bit of color in it and a little bit of dichro. It was dedicated to Jerry Sandberg with Coating by Sandberg, CBS Glass, the dichro. And then it was also dedicated to Paul Troutman at North Star Glass for giving color to our world. So it was in 94 when the color really started coming out. And one of the first things I remember from me really understanding how color worked and stuff like this was when I'm doing the editing in 2002 after my Flame-Off, and there's some young kid, probably 22 or so, and he's being interviewed about, we interviewed probably 50 of the people in the audience, and then everybody that was one of the competitors and all. But they had everything in the world of glass in this 32 hours of film that we edited down. But I remember running into this thing, this kid, this young punk-ass bitch, was sitting there looking right into the camera, saying how when he started working glass, there was only 16 colors. And I looked at this little bitch and said, "You fucking turd." It says, "You're bitching about 16 colors when you came in and everything's handed to you on a silver platter. You got videos, you got magazines, you got talk groups. Fuck you, bitch." Says, "You try having 20 years of clear only, and then you bitch about having 16 colors of glass." So 94 is when it really came out there where everybody had glass.
Yeah. But
apparently this one, young punk-ass bitch thought that wasn't enough for him.
That's hilarious. I feel the same way. And I myself say it, when I started, there was 12 colors available. But I say it humbly because of where it is now, where we have almost a palette like the soft glass artists have had for hundreds of years. The Troutmans of our world, the alchemists, these guys have more or less put their lives on the line to learn this alchemy to make sure we have this gigantic palette of color that we have now available to us.
Yep.
You know, I get on my knees and bow to them as a thank you for their innovation and pushing our industry. Because fuck, man, you see what guys are getting paid now for their pipes, and they wouldn't be getting this money if there wasn't any colored glass.
Yeah.
You know, and then all these amateurs that are hiding their shitty seals and everything else with it. So yeah, I agree. So thank you for being forthright and not giving a shit about how you feel. I like the honesty. I dig it. So on the color thing, that being said, back to the lightning round here, or the crash the kiln round. What are your top 5 favorite colors in glass?
I like the silver bearing glass because I'm colorblind to blues and greens, so I don't see those, and they kind of blend into a gray area. I mean, where you would look at it, you'd look at something that's gray, and that's what I would see as blues and greens. And so what I like, my favorite colors is indigo luster because of the high silver of it, and then triple passion from Glass Alchemy, and then just a basic white, like a snow white out of boral sticks. But I don't think color influences what I do. I'm more sculptural, and I'm not surface decoration. So really, to me, it's all about the sculpting thing. Like I'm going to be teaching at Glasscraft and Boro School and the Glass Resort in August and September, and the whole realm of the teaching is basically on sculpture and not color, and most all the class is going to be done with clear boro, because why have a bunch of ranked beginners, and they're going to be ranked to start with, they're going to be pros when they end, but to start with is like, why waste a bunch of $40-50 a pound color when it's going to be shit anyway right in the beginning if you haven't done sculptural work. So we're just going to use 6, 8, and 10 clear boro, which is very affordable. It's like dirt cheap, and it's going to be easier to sculpt with. And plus, I can't really show you how to do a really perfect seal from 4 angles when you're doing a leg on a unicorn out of color versus out of clear. Because as soon as you go in there with color, you're losing the ability to see through the piece to see how it's welding on the back side of it. That's why every time you weld, at least from a class with me, you're going to heat that up directly from 4 angles. Don't trust that I've got A heated up and B heated up. I push them together, and they're all going to flow on a molecular level and be happy as a covalent bond on a chemical level. No, that doesn't work. You got to physically go in there. It's borosilicate. You have to weld it 4 different angles, or it's not going to be happy.
Yeah, exactly.
And as soon as you break one rule, the glass will remember, and it'll be the thing that at 2 a.m. you're asleep and your studio's 500 yards from where you're sleeping, and you hear dink, and you know exactly what broke where.
Yep. And that's a great transition.
I don't really give a shit about color.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, I love your honesty, man. And it's a great transition into what, if you could describe the sound of glass cracking in one word. It could be an emotional word or a physical or whatever, but what's the one word you could describe the sound of glass cracking?
It's tink, T-I-N-K. It's that little release of the stress within the glass. Yeah. And it just goes dink, and we've all heard it. And I've had pieces explode on me while I'm working on them, that I've had them in the oven, and I bring it out, and it might be a 2-inch belly on a piece of like a big Indian dancer, and I've had a piece crack and shoot glass over my left shoulder and stick in the drywall behind me, 2 feet behind me on a wall. Moving a total of 3 feet. I've had things explode on me and left and right. Everybody got burns and all this sort of stuff. But, it's nothing. I've been burned, and I've had every finger and toe broken, and, I've had acid poured on my right hand from when I used to do silver work, and I've had black widow bite me, a scorpion bite me, rolled through a beaver tail cactus, had 2,000 needles pulled out of my body.
Holy shit.
So as far as what's your worst thing happened in glass, that's nothing. Glass is a good ride right now. I think that right now there's so many glass workers out there and people selling their studios and shit like that. It's just, you have to be good, you have to be innovative, or you just have to love it and want to be poor. Because very few people now can make a lot of money so they can send a child to college and make a house payment and buy a new car every 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not happening in our group. It's almost like all the glass blowers nowadays have turned into transient bums, and they're quite happy with it. And I was probably the first transient bum living in my van, and I had a beard for 37 years. I've been that route. When people look at me and say, all these guys out there with, a big beard and this and that and everything. It's just, I've been there. And I shaved my beard for my wife, and immediately looked 20 years younger. And as far as marketing, I'm easier to market me now than when we had that big, white beard, looking like Santa.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, so then we'll pass on the worst injury in the studio, because you have had a lifetime of injuries. So.
Well, when we're talking about worst injuries in the studio, I've got to tell you the one about my brother's left testicle.
Oh, Jesus. Well, let's hear it.
There's probably been hundreds of people that have heard this story when I'm teaching and at conferences and stuff like this. But when I was learning at Disney World, I was coming back and forth to Cocoa Beach, and I was living in a trailer in Cocoa Beach with my younger brother, and I would learn everything there and then come back, and I had a National 3A blowpipe and an oxygen and propane, and we didn't have an oven or anything like that. We were making little small solids, and I'd learn at Disney. I'd come back, I'd show him something, and he was a major stoner. I was all right. I'd cop a buzz anytime I wanted to, but he was like constantly stoned. And so I'm 24, working at Disney, just getting ready to get out of the Air Force, and my younger brother's like 20. And so I'm showing him something here and this and that, and I'm sitting on the couch, and we've both been smoking, and he's sitting here, and he's wearing a bathrobe and no underwear, and he's at the torch, and he's making this little oven out of 10-millimeter rod, and he's finished the whole piece, and it's got a punty on the belly of the oven. And because we didn't have an oven or anything like that, he's getting ready to knock the piece off the punty, so you really heat up the body of the oven, and then you heat up your tweezers, and then you grab you heat the body of the elephant, and then you heat up your tweezers, and you get ready to grab the elephant and knock the punty off and fire polish the belly. Mm-hmm. So he heats up the tweezers, he got the oven or the elephant really hot, and then he sneezes or something like this, and he bumps into the National. The elephant falls off the punty, lands on the torch table, and bounces onto his chest and fuses to his chest. And the first thing you do, and we've all done it, you backhand. You swat it off mm-hmm. your clothing or your body or whatever. It's happened to us 1,000 times. So he swatted it, and it went down his pants, but he wasn't wearing pants. So it went down to the space between the left side of his testicle and his left inner thigh. And this is an elephant that's probably the size of a good-sized grape. It was glowing red when it fell off, and it fused the skin on the inner thigh and the left side of the testicle. And this whole story, and it goes on, it's fun, this whole story happened in less than 2 seconds. So heat up the elephant, heat up the tweezers, elephant gets bumped, elephant gets stuck to your chest, you're screaming and yelling. I'm on the couch laughing my ass off. He swats the elephant to get it off his chest because it's burning him. It goes straight down his crotch, fuses to the skin of the inner thigh, the inner left testicle, and he jumps up, he stands, he spreads his legs, and the skin has melted, and it spreads out like a bat wing. Oh. And then he's screaming and yelling, and still in this 2-second story, I'm saying, oh, let me get some water, I'll throw on it. And he says, no, it'll explode, and it'll cut me, and this and that. And meanwhile, where I'll go get water, I'm laughing and roll off the couch laughing, and he's jumping up and down. He's burned his chest, he's burned his balls, and he's grabbing his tweezers that are still glowing red. This is in real time, less than 2 seconds. He grabs the tweezers that were glowing red, and he's going to grab the elephant to pull it off. He misses the elephant, and he impales himself twice with the the tweezers sticking into his thigh as if Vlad the Impaler vampire got skewered.
God.
So and not that he just got hit by those, they were red fucking hot.
Oh my God.
So burned chest, burned balls, impaled twice, and then finally they pulled the tweezers out, grabbed the thing, yanked it out, and then that pulled the flesh out too as it was burned. And I'm still working active duty Air Force. I'm not on duty there, but I hop him on my motorcycle. We take him to the ER and get him fixed up with Furus and all this stuff for a good serious burn. But that's probably one of the better glass stories on the burn from hell.
Oh my God! Holy shit!
And that's, if you were to do a Google search under Matt's left testicle, that story pops up now and then.
Awesome. I have to put that in the show notes. Oh my God, man! Holy shit, that's crazy. Yeah, so don't work.
The other good story was a guy named, I think his name's Jim Singer, and he was doing demo at Disney World in the park when I was working there, and in the summer or at the let's see, this must have been after I left. But in the summer, they would let all the high schools around in Florida, they would go to Disney World as, like a graduation thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So you got a whole group of, say, 30 high school girls coming through where you're demoing on the main street in Disney World, and you're making your glass, and all these little girlies are watching this and that. And so Jim Singer is crazed out of his mind watching all these hot little girls and stuff, and he reaches for something through the torch. And because he's a stupid asshole guy, and he's working a National 3A blowpipe with a tight focus of an OX3 tip, it's like a laser beam.
Yeah.
But he reaches for something, and he peels from his left wrist to his left elbow. He reached straight on through like a laser beam, and he has this 15-inch burn that just opened up into an ooze.
Oh.
I mean, it just ripped him up. But because he's got all these young girlies watching, he doesn't scream and yell, and he finishes his piece. And then he puts his piece down, he says, thanks to everybody, he goes back and passes out. But it's all because he didn't want to go, ow, 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 in front of a bunch of little girls.
Yeah, I do that shit all the time. I'll burn myself when I'm on stage, and I'm like, I just ignore it.
Yep.
Just suck it up and deal with it. We have Jimmy Dills is one of our guys. He's been with us for 22 years. And, it gets, how it is. You get repetition going. You get a little sleepy sometimes. And he nodded off on the torch and put his hand right in the fucking flame, right in front of like 50 people. And he's like, I look up and all their eyes are wide open. And he's like, I just went through my process. I finished my piece. And then I went in the back and I freaked the fuck out.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's so funny, man. The show must go on, per se, I guess. Oh, man.
Yep.
Terrible. So, yeah, man. So I was going to ask, the new question I have is about glass-themed tattoos. I don't know if you have any tattoos at all, or if you have any that are glass-blowing related.
I have I probably in 1998 or 99, I had a whole bunch of flat bar that was cobalt bar from Europe that was borosilicate. And it was like an oval bar that might have been a half an inch wide, a quarter of an inch thick, and then maybe 5 feet long. I had it sent, actually I ran into some of it that Ross at ABR had made dichroed. So it was cobalt flat bar that had dichro on it, and I made these pendants called squiggles. And they're really incredible, and I probably made 50 or 60 different designs of these things. And at a conference in Portland, maybe about 20 years ago, I had on my left shoulder one of these squiggles with flames coming out of it.
Nice.
So the only tattoo I've got is a flaming squiggle that's on my left shoulder.
Hell yeah. Badass. So the last and final question, it's always a fun one, is if you were stranded on an island, it could be any island of your choice, naked ladies, it could be resort, it could be deserted, whatever, and there's a glass blowing studio on there, and it supplies your torch, your gases, and your kiln, and you had to make something. What 5 items would you bring?
You have to make something?
No. Yeah.
I mean, are the 5 items my supplies or glass rod or tools?
It's whatever you need to make something. Could be in whatever you need to make.
Whatever I need to make them. Well, I'm not a big tool hog. All I need is tweezers and graphite paddle, and that's pretty much it, because most of the shaping I do is straight through, just letting the glass flow or manipulating it with very, very few tools.
Mm-hmm.
So in the way of specific, other than glass rods, my main tools is just simple tweezers that don't have teeth, so they're flat inside tweezers, and graphite paddle that I don't really have a lot of tools that I use. The one thing I do use that nobody else has is it's a stainless steel tool called a bone rongeur, RON. RONJUIRE, something like this. It's a French name, and it's a surgical tool for amputation flaps.
Huh.
If you cut a finger off, like run it through a bandsaw, or you're a butcher, and you come to the emergency room, and this is before they put your finger back on. So this is when you throw that tip of the finger off, and then you got this, half a finger looking at you with a bone, and then the skin comes to the end of it. The first thing you realize is that there's not enough skin to fold around over what had been cut off. So you have to remove some of the bone to be able to stretch the skin around and do that.
Right.
And this bone rongeur is a tool that is, it's basically like the classic butter knife that everybody has. But instead of having the blade along the length of it, it's got a curved blade on the tip of it that's about a half an inch wide, and it curves down at about a 30-degree angle, but it has a little recurve on the bottom of it, and you actually use this tool and you pull it along a piece of bone, and it will work as a file, and it files the bone down to where it's smooth, so that when you do a surgical flap over an amputation, the bone doesn't poke through. You don't have a sharp bone underneath there that, hey, I got my finger fixed, and you touch something and your bone pokes through.
Right.
That's bad technique.
Yeah.
So this bone rongeur is a tool that I use constantly. So that would be the one thing that I would probably have with me and I use it for ribs, for doing detail around faces and all that sort of stuff. But it's a tool I've had for 45 years.
Nice. Well, there's one piece of equipment everybody forgets to mention, just because we always wear them all the time, and your glasses.
What I'm wearing, because I don't do a lot of fuming,
Mm-hmm.
and I do a lot of work with color, but I'm still using. I think I've got 287 AUR,
Okay.
or they're infrared ultraviolet
Yep.
from Aura Lens, that I've got probably from maybe 15 or 18 years ago.
Yeah. Back when glasses were made well compared to some of the shit being made nowadays. Huh. Interesting. Yeah, man, it's amazing. I hate seeing these stories like with, I don't want to say company names, but some of the major brands out there that these glasses are quote unquote what we need, and then they come to find out the spectrums are wrong, or they just don't do what they're supposed to do, and people are having issues, whether it's calcium buildup in their eyes or burning their retinas, or it's ridiculous. So, all right, man. Well, again, I appreciate your time. And before I let you go, if you want to give us any kind of parting piece of advice, and then also where we can find you out there in the world of cyberspace.
Well, the one thing is, when will this be aired?
This is actually going to come out on Monday. This coming up Monday.
Okay, then I could use a few more students in my classes. I'm teaching at Glasscraft in Denver, August, I believe, whatever the Saturday, Sunday is. I think it's the 5th and 6th of August. And then that's Glasscraft Denver, August 5th and 6th. And then I'm teaching at the Boro School in Seattle, August 20th and 21st. And then I'm teaching in Frederick, Maryland, at the Glass Resort, September 10 and 11.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make sure those are all in the show notes for you. For sure.
And then that's pretty much it. And other than that, I can be hired if somebody wants to fly me out and have me teach a group of guys. That's fine. I have been collaborating the past couple of years, some with Eric Anders,
Mm-hmm.
and with some of the pipe stuff that he's doing, and also right now Redbeard, Patrick Vjorlik in Canada, that does the great Canadian glass gathering. He's got a bunch of my work up there that's going to be put in with a lot of Canadian glass blowers.
Nice. Heck yeah. Well, once again, Lewis, if you want to hang on, actually, after we, I'll say goodbye on the air, and then we'll say our goodbyes off the air real quick. But, yeah, thank you so much again for coming on and sharing your knowledge. And, again, it's an honor to have you on here. To me, you're one of the godfathers of flame working in our industry and, the culture. And to see that you're, reaching out to the younger generations, whether they're making pipes or making figures or whatever it is, it's exciting. And I'm glad to see that you're up to, using the technology we have and going from the VHS to online stuff nowadays. And it's incredible. So, again, thank you so much for coming on and for your time today.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed our conversation with Lewis. And we'll see you next time on the Wise Guy Radio Show. You guys take care. Peace. This episode is also brought to you by C-Cube Co. C-Cube now creates a wide range of specialty and one-of-a-kind artistic glassware, items such as hand-blown wine crafts, insulated coffee mugs, pint glasses, and custom piggy banks, plus glass pendants that you can have personalized with imprinting logos and color accents that are available. Just go to ccubeco, that's SEACUBECO.com for more information. That's ccubeco.com. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show. If you have any questions, comments, or remarks, please leave them in the show notes page area where it says comments. We'll see you soon. Have a wise night.
You're listening to the